Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Three Geeks PVD collaboration. We are here with the legendary Carl Gottlieb. How are you doing today?
So far, so good. It's up to you guys now.
That's great.
Are you in California?
Yes.
Okay. How are things out there in California?
Hot. It's 99 degrees today.
Wow.
Holy cow.
It's like in the 50s here.
And luckily, West Hollywood isn't on fire, but a lot of, about 1 billion acres of burning.
Yeah, that's awful. I can't even imagine what that's like to try to get through something along those lines.
That's a motherfucker.
Yeah.
You should excuse the expression. See, we can say whatever we want, right?
Oh, you can. It's present. It's good.
So, Carl, let's start off a little bit in your early life, in your childhood. I'd read somewhere where your parents were in engineering and in the medical field.
Yes.
Were they supportive of your creative endeavors? Because I know there's that old kind of cliche where the very professional parents want their children to be doctors and judges and lawyers and that. Was that the case or no?
No, I was very, very fortunate. My dad was a civil servant, and but he trained as an engineer, as a civil engineer, and he wanted to go out and build roads and bridges and railroads and tunnels. That was what he wanted to do. But it was the Depression, and there weren't a lot of jobs. There wasn't a lot of construction or engineering. So in the midst of the Depression, he had a child on the way, me. So he took a job with the city of New York as a civil service, as an engineer, but in the Department of Housing and Zoning, and mostly pushing paperwork and doing permits and inspections and that kind of stuff. And his heartfelt advice to me was, do what you want to do. Don't get trapped in a job you don't like, because I don't like my job, but I've got 25 years into retirement, I've got a pension, we've got health care, the benefits. I can't pass up the benefits. And the sad thing was that when he retired, he was at the top of his civil service, but he couldn't get any higher without a political appointment. He had passed every civil service test going up the ladder, so he was like a GS-15 or something. But civil service salaries really lagged the private sector, so we were essentially, lower middle class. I mean, meet 3 times a week, not every day.
Yeah.
And he said, just do what you want to do. So armed with that, incentive, and my mom, of course, not only encouraged me, but she sent me for aptitude testing to see what I would, what I was really suited for. And she was very progressive. They were both very progressive parents for the 40s. And so they wanted me to do what I wanted to do. So, and I got a no strings attached scholarship from the state of New York, what they used to call a Regents scholarship. It was based on a competitive exam. And if you won it, you'd get 4 years of just cash stipends every year that you could use for tuition or books or, drugs. It didn't matter. They just sent you a check. They just sent you a check. So my parents saved a little bit for college. So I went to 2 good colleges. I went to City College of New York, which was a very upscale. They used to call it the blue-collar Harvard because, the philosophy and the English departments were really strong. Anyway, I went to CCNY for a couple of years, and then I wanted to go to a place that was tired of taking public transportation to high school and college, so I transferred. I wanted to go to a school with fraternities and, dormitories and a football team and a stadium, and that was Syracuse, and they had a journalism school, which was my interest. I was always a writer. So I went to Syracuse, majored in theater and journalism, and graduated with the vow that I was only going to do show business or writing. I wasn't going to be a bartender or a cop or a cab driver or office temp or any of those things. If I couldn't make money in a theater or writing, I wouldn't do it. So I had a lot of low-budget jobs. I mean, I was getting like $25 and meals, doing lighting and sound for a coffee house in Greenwich Village. But, I could make a living. One job led to another, and then pretty soon I had a career.
So when did you make the decision to be an actor and a writer? Was that, obviously before college, but did you know, like, when you were a teenager or when you were a little kid?
I was always a writer. Words were my friends. I can't remember not being able to read. So I was always reading and writing. I won a prize for English composition in high school. I edited the yearbook. I edited the City College Humor magazine. I wrote a daily column, a weekly column for the Syracuse newspaper, the university newspaper, which was, because it was a journalism school paper, it was pretty professionally run daily. So I was always writing, always putting words on paper and getting paid for it for the most part. And then theater arts was different, but I was a techie. I was a stage manager and a lighting guy to begin with. And, there's always more opportunity for those guys than there is for writers and actors. But I knew I was going to be in show business. I knew I was going to be writing. And so I never took a job that wasn't about writing or show business. So it's like I knew. And I actually can trace the decision back. I was hiking across the campus in Syracuse. It was the dead of winter. I graduated mid-year in January. I should have been a class of June '59, but I had to make up a few credits because I transferred. So I was actually class of January '60. And in January, the snow is 12 feet deep. It doesn't get light until 8 in the morning. It was dark and cold, and I was trudging across the campus. And I was saying, okay, I'm done. I finished. I just graduated. I'm not going anywhere. There's no graduation ceremony. I can come back in June if I want to put on a cap and gown. But for now, when I walk out of the theater arts building, I'm done. I'm done with education. I've done my 16 years. K through 8, 9 through 12, and 12 through 16. Straight through, just the way you're supposed to do it. No time off, no gap year, none of that shit that you guys get to do. I went to school for 16 years straight and came out with a Bachelor of Science degree with a dual major in speech and dramatic art and journalism. From what turned out to be a really good journalism school, which was now it's the Annenberg School of Communications. In those days, it was just the Syracuse University J School, but it was competitive with Northwestern and University of Missouri and Columbia, which were the big journalism schools in that time.
Okay, can you tell a little bit about
a little bit about what?
The committee?
The committee was a happiest time of my life. I was in the Army. My friend and roommate from college, Larry Hankin, stayed in New York. He was pursuing a career as a stand-up as an actor. I got drafted. He got out of the draft. I didn't. But I'm in the Army. I'm stationed in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And I see that Larry Hankin is going to open with a company of the Compass Theater in St. Louis, which was one of the first improvisational theaters ever in the world. Compass Theater was the ancestor of Second City. So he was opening in a Compass company in St. Louis. And I was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, so I could go in on the weekends and hang out. So I did. And from St. Louis, he went to Second City. Then he got fired from Second City, but he got hired by Alan Meyerson, who was putting together the committee in San Francisco. So he went to San Francisco, and he wrote me this. He says, San Francisco is great. You've got to come here. So I did. I mean, I got out of the Army, and I went to San Francisco, and I hung out with the committee, and they needed a stage manager, and that's what I did. So I became a stage manager for the committee, and then I started appearing in a couple of sketches in the part of stage manager. I'd go on stage and get my laughs. I would perform in a couple of different improvisations, and then I directed a company of the committee, and then I got hired. Then I went to New York. I left the committee for a year, went to New York, sold my first article for big money to Esquire magazine. I sold an article on motorcycles, bought a motorcycle, and then got hired to come back to the committee as an actor in a company with Howard Hessman and Dick Stahl and some. It was a great company. And I went back as an actor in '66 and was in San Francisco from '66 to '68, which is ground zero of the Cultural Revolution. Improvising, 2 shows a night, 3 on Saturday, 6 nights a week, doing, and because we were dark on Mondays, we could go see whatever the other nightclubs were dark on Sundays. So if we were dark on Mondays, we could go to the Hungry Eye or the Purple Onion or the El Matador or any of the jazz clubs off Broadway, on Broadway. So I could see Lenny Bruce and the Smothers Brothers and Mort Saul and every act that came through San Francisco. So it was, it was the best of times. And then in '68, the company moved to a theater in Los Angeles, and that was the beginning of the big time because we were playing in a theater on the Sunset Strip. We were well reviewed. Everybody came to see us. Bob Altman came and hired me to do the movie MASH. Smothers Brothers hired me to write their shows. So, that led to the big time. But the committee was 4 or 5 years of the best, most creative years of my life. In terms of, it's where I learned everything I know about show business.
Okay. I'm taking improv classes to really help with this.
Well, everybody teaches improv now. I mean, there are really good theater groups like the Groundlings and Upright Citizens Brigade and of course Second City that make a good living teaching people who want to do improv, and the classes tend to be a kind of a feeder for the most talented kind of rise to the top. First, if you're spotted in a class, then you get maybe hired for a touring company or because Second City provides companies to like cruise ships, and so you're not in Chicago, but you're performing at Second City, and so it's good for everybody. So, but that's nowadays. In those days, we all had workshops. I mean, the committee had workshops. We found our new players, usually coming out of workshops. It's hard to audition for improvisation. It's not like you have a prepared script. You just have to do the exercises and demonstrate that you have a facility for the skills that are required for improvisation, which are kind of different than the skills that are necessary for any other performing art.
Okay.
I have a question about the Smothers Brothers.
Sure.
What was it like to work on that very hip but somewhat controversial show?
I kind of hate what was it like questions because it was it was a job. It was a great job. And what was it like was it was a bunch of really smart, funny young people my own age who were all hired at roughly the same time as Lorenzo Music and Bob Einstein and Steve Martin and Murray Roman and some others. Lorenzo, I said Lorenzo Music. Anyway, and we were charged with writing funny sketch material for the funniest sketch performers in variety television at the time, or certainly the three funniest shows. It was the golden age of variety. I mean, it was Carol Burnett, and Laugh-In, and Red Skelton, and there were a lot of shows. But there was the group that was in the writing the Smothers Brothers show was particularly young and hip and creative, and the Smothers wanted to be revolutionary and different and politically hip. So we got to be as hip as we could be within the confines of the CBS network mindset, which was fairly conservative. I mean, at that time, CBS was the Tiffany of networks, and they were very aware of their, responsibilities. Walter Cronkite, the heavies, and they didn't like that the Smothers were didn't give a shit about censorship.
Do you have any cool stories about Tom or Dick?
Printable, the not involving sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Well, I mean, at this point, hell, whatever.
No, I mean they were a hip young act. They had a couple of attempts at television that didn't do well. But when they went on the air with the variety show, they knocked Bonanza out of number one. That was the first time that ever happened. And they started winning their time slot, and they were a top 10 variety show. And they owned the show. By that time, they didn't have to put up with network-approved producers. They were their own producers. So all they had to do was do the show and supply the finished tape to the network. And then the network would grumble about, Joan Baez is singing pacifist songs, and Pete Seeger is singing subversive stuff, and Harry Belafonte is singing subversive stuff, and you're doing a sketch about a black man kissing a white woman, and that was scandalous. And so the network hated it and eventually canceled the show. The same year we won the Emmy, we were canceled. That doesn't happen very often, that a canceled show wins the Emmy. We knocked Laugh-In out of top variety musical comedy slot.
Wow.
And the Emmy Award for Best Comedy Musical Variety Show goes to, and the Laugh-In people have been winning 2 years in a row, kind of like Saturday Night Live now. Laugh-In people were already standing up when they announced the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Then we got to go up on stage and collect our Emmys.
That's awesome. That's a good win in the end.
Yeah, that was good.
So you've worked on Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy. Happy Days is one of my favorite shows of all time, and of course, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy are connected.
Yep. I never did Happy Days, but I did Mork and Mindy as an actor, and I did Laverne and Shirley as an actor and as a director. I directed an episode of that. So yeah, and I knew all the people involved. I knew Gary Marshall. I knew Penny Marshall. Penny and I dated at one time when she was a young up-and-coming actress before she got Laverne. At that time, she was a day player on Odd Couple, playing Myrna, the secretary, Myrna Turner. And I was on Odd Couple as a story editor. So, I mean, in those days, it was a fairly small world. If you were a funny, improvising actor in comedy, or stand-up for that matter, you knew everybody else in the business. You got to remember, in those days, in the early 60s, you could fit every folk singer in New York into the circle in Washington Square on a Sunday afternoon for hootenannies. That was like every folk singer there was. And then folk singing became big. The Kingston Trio became hot shit. The Limelighters, and the Smothers Brothers did well with their take on it, which was comedic. So, if you were working as a comic actor or improviser or stand-up, you knew almost everybody else in the business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tended to do the same. You did guest shots on the same show. You auditioned, and there was a sense of community. I mean, that you don't see that anymore. But there was an actor who was the same physical type as me, sitting around and had glasses. A guy named Ollie Clark, and another guy named Michael Lerner, heavy-set character actor. And we would tell each other if we were auditioning, hey, did you get that call? Tell your agent they're looking for a guy like us. And we would wind up at the same auditions, and we didn't care. We didn't feel terribly competitive. One of us got it, great. One of the others would get it the next time. So we would tell each other about opportunities. That doesn't happen anymore.
Mm-hmm. When you, because you talked about writing some shows and whatnot, and writing, of course, later we'll talk about your writing in movies. What's the process like for you when you sit down to write?
I've described it as you make ever-decreasing concentric circles around the keyboard until there's no place else left to go. And then, to quote Dorothy Parker, you just open up a vein and write. It's lonely, painful, difficult work. George Bernard Shaw is credited, I don't know who actually said it first. Somebody said, Mr. Shaw, do you like being a writer? And Shaw replied, I like having written. The process of writing itself is painful. But, if that's what you do, that's what you do. It's like if you're a ballerina, after a 4-hour practice session, your feet are going to bleed. Mm-hmm. Most people don't go into professions where they bleed at the end of a workday. But in show business, it's not uncommon. And if you're not bleeding, if you're not a dancer and your feet aren't bleeding, you're a comedian and your soul is bleeding, or you're an actor and your ego is bruised and damaged by constant rejection. It's not an easy life, and I don't recommend it to anybody who wants an easy life. I mean, I tell writers, even if you're successful, you're going to be unemployed most of your adult life. So think about something else to do in the meantime. Get a hobby. Build ships in a bottle.
So do you have a preference, writing, directing, or
acting? Acting's the best. You come in, they give you a trailer, guy comes and gets you when it's time on the set, you've memorized your lines, you go stand on your mark, you say your words, they point you at the craft service table, here, look, free food. This is pre-pandemic. And then you go back to your trailer and wait for the next setup. And then when you're done, at the end of the day, you go home. You don't have to worry about if you've made your day. You don't have to worry about did you get all the coverage. You don't have to worry, was your close-up okay? I mean, you can worry, but it's not your responsibility. All you have to do is show up and say your words. It's the easiest part of the business.
I got another question about Mork and Mindy real quick.
Sure.
What was your experience being on that show? Because I've heard, watching some interviews with some of the Happy Days cast, that Robin Williams was just so into that role, and he would never, do the same lines over and over again. Was it the same experience on Mork and Mindy?
Robin was a force of nature. There has not been an actor like him before or since. Maybe Jonathan Winters 50 years ago. But Robin was this, insane, irrepressible talent, and you didn't really direct him. I mean, you kind of arranged the cameras so you would not miss whatever it was that Robin was doing. And sometimes if he went off the mark and strayed off the text, you'd cut and say, Robin, let's go back to the script. And he'd go back to the script. He was conscientious. But like I say, it was a force of nature. There's been no actor before or since that could do what he did. And I am not surprised that when he was diagnosed with a disease that was going to affect the quickness of his wit and the quickness of his responses, I have no doubt that the colossal disappointment of learning that fact hastened his departure.
Yeah. I gotta ask. So one of my favorite films of all time is The Jerk, with Steve Martin, and you were a big part of that. How does that idea come about?
Steve Martin got a contract with Paramount to write 3 films for himself to star in, and they funded a short subject to introduce him to the film audience. That short was The Absent-Minded Waiter, which I directed for Steve, and it was nominated for an Academy Award. And Steve and I were, Steve said, by that time I had written Jaws and I had written Which Way Is Up for Richard Pryor, so my comedy credentials were in place. So Steve asked me if I'd collaborate with him on his first screenplay, because he had never done that before, and he knew I did. And we were friends. We went back to, this was 75, 76, and we went back to 68 together. So I had house sat his place in Aspen in the old days, and when I needed a place to write, I went to his house. We were friends. So we got this job. We got a writer's room at Paramount that the studio gave us. We'd show up. They gave us yellow pads and pencils and electric typewriters. And we showed up every day at the room and looked at each other and said, well, now what? And that went on for a couple of weeks. We didn't know what the fuck we were doing. And then Steve said, my manager thinks it should be about money because everybody's interested in money. And, okay, that's a good idea. Something about money. And then, again, we're sitting around just kicking ideas. And Steve said, there's a line in my act that always gets a laugh, so I know it's funny. And I was born a poor black child. We looked at each other and said, well, what if you were? Where does that take us? And we started writing the opening sequences of The Jerk, the stuff in the Mississippi Delta, where he discovers he's not black. That was the genesis of that movie. I was born a poor black child.
Well, Carl, can we talk a little bit about Jaws?
I suppose so. Nowadays I call it the fish movie, but yes.
Well, I read where Steven Spielberg got you kind of solidified with the project because not only were you kind of rewriting the script that was originally pitched, but he got you to be he got you an acting part in it so that you would be kind of like have this synergy.
Exactly. He asked you if I would act in it in a part that was, the run of the picture. So it was a fairly important part. Meadows, the editor of the paper.
Sure. Yeah.
So I got the job as an actor first, and he said, you can help me with improvising because I'm going to be working with a lot of naive actors, a lot of inexperienced actors. There's no budget for Hollywood actors. I got Scheider and Dreyfuss and Shaw, but nobody, maybe Murray Hamilton, maybe one or two others, but everybody else is going to be local or a Boston hire. So I said, great, sure, I can do that. And then he sent me a copy of the script that he was working with a note on it saying, eviscerate it. So I wrote a memo about what I thought about the script. I was right about one thing and wrong about another thing. The thing I was wrong about was, I remember saying, does the girl in the first scene have to have sex and die? Is that such a horror movie cliche? a teenager. If we see you naked in the first reel, you're going to be dead by the second reel. You know, but Steven says, well, I think I have a way of shooting it that's going to be interesting. Sure enough. And the other thing that I got right was, and I have a memo that says this, I said, if we do our jobs right, writer and director, people will feel about going in the ocean the way they felt about taking a shower after Psycho. And sure enough, 45 years later, on the AFI top 100 horror films of all time, Psycho's number 1 and Jaws is number 2.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah. What was it like working with Peter Benchley? Was it a kind of a smooth working relationship or no?
Well, we didn't work together. We were what you would call serial collaborators.
Okay.
He wrote the novel. The novel was a bestseller. That's what was optioned for a motion picture. Howard Sackler, Peter Benchley also wrote the first couple of drafts of the movie.
Okay.
They didn't satisfy Stephen or Zanuck and Brown. So they hired another more professional screenwriter named Howard Sackler, who wrote an intermediate draft and introduced the famous Indianapolis speech that comes out of Sackler's draft, the draft of it, not the speech itself. But it was, 2 pages of monologue by Quint explaining where he's coming from. So that was the Sackler draft. And that's the draft that I inherited and that I started rewriting 3 weeks before principal photography. And then we went on, I got the job offer on a Monday. Tuesday, Stephen and I were off for New England. We stopped in Boston for 3 or 4 days to cast extras. Then we went to Martha's Vineyard where we shared a house and lived, ate, breathed, slept. We didn't sleep together. We had separate bedrooms. But we were basically, eating meals together, talking about when we weren't actually making the movie, we were talking about the movie and having dinner with Verna Fields, who was editing the movie, and Zanuck or Brown, whoever was in the vineyard for that. And it was, again, a very intensely collaborative experience. And it turned out well. Who knew?
Yeah. And then you wrote a book called The Jaws Log, which is a Bible, so to speak, if you will, those type of books. So, yep, there you go, right there.
Wherever books are sold, buy it. You won't be disappointed. Yeah, I wrote a book about it. It came out the same time the movie was released and sold a couple million copies. So that was the only money I made from Jaws was from the book.
Oh, okay.
But Zanuck and Brown were really stingy bastards, and they, I was getting paid for scale for writing and scale for acting, which was like okay. I lived on my per diem and then cashed my checks and bought a brand new little BMW 2002 with my Jaws money and then drove it back to California with my then wife. We bought it in New Jersey right after they wrapped me. See, I got wrapped in, I guess, July or August because we had shot everything with words had been filled. There was nothing left but water and shark and boat. And I wasn't involved in any of that. So they let me go. So I went to New Jersey with my wife. We bought a little car. In those days, you had to break a car in slowly. You had to drive it for 1,000, 2,000 miles without going over 60. So we drove the car leisurely. We drove south from New Jersey to Nashville, where a bunch of our friends were making a movie called Nashville. So we hung out with Bob Altman and Ronnie Blakely and that crowd, and then continued on. And, we got as far as Texarkana, and then I got a call, you needed back in L.A. So I went back to L.A. to work in television, and Allison finished driving by herself and showed up in L.A. with our new little car. And we lived happily ever after until we got a divorce.
Well, last question from me. You've held many positions in the Writers Guild of America organization.
Yes.
Could you maybe tell the listeners or the watchers, what does that organization do? What is its goal?
Writers Guild of America is, at its heart, a labor union devoted to serving the interests of the community of writers. So it has union rules about wages and working conditions. It arbitrates screen credits when writers disagree about who should get screen credit. And it distributes residuals and reuse payments that are mandated by the contract that the studios owe us when they reuse our material. And because the Guild had been very helpful to me just as a writer, because if you're a professional writer, it's like if you're a professional in show business, you belong to one of the, in those days, one of the four A's: Actors Equity, Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA, Writers Guild, Directors Guild. So I belong to all of those unions. But I was most interested in the Writers Guild because they served me the best. They did well by me. So in the spirit of giving back, I volunteered for Guild service. I ran for the board of directors, and I won. And then I on and off served on the board of directors for on and off for the next 20 years. I was vice president for 4 different terms. And then finally I retired, but I spent about 25 years in Guild governance. And also I represented American writers at the International Affiliation of Writers Guilds, which was, as you can tell, exactly what it says. Most of the English-speaking languages, UK, Ireland, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, they all have Writers Guilds, kind of on the same model as Writers Guild US. And there's a Writers Guild East in New York, which is similar. Years ago, somebody asked the question in a meeting, how come if there's one Germany, there's still 2 Writers Guilds? Because we had a Writers Guild East and West, and we still do. That division is still perpetuated, but it's rooted in history, and it's never been successfully ironed out. So we're kind of like the Dred Scott decision, separate but equal. But Writers Guild West is more equal because we administer residuals for everybody.
Okay.
I was going through your IMDb as I was getting ready for the interview today, and I've got one more question. One of the things that caught my eye was a movie called The Caveman, which I now must seek out and watch. Can you tell me what that's about and the experience working on it?
Oh, sure. Caveman was enormous fun. Larry Terman and David Foster, a couple of producers, had a deal at Warner Brothers, and they came to me and they said, do you remember 1 Million BC? And I said, the black and white one or the color one with Raquel Welch in a fur bikini? He said, both of them. I said, yeah, they're part of the culture. I remember those. He said, well, we want to do the same thing, only funny. Funny cave people. Good idea. So I signed on and I wrote a few drafts, and then they wanted to go more slapstick, so they asked me if I would collaborate with Rudy DeLuca, who was one of Mel Brooks's favorite writers, and I said, I'll work with Rudy, and the script kind of changed direction with Rudy's input, because we both have screenplay credit. We developed this kind of broad physical comedy about primitive man. The very first time that anything happened. First time man walked erect. First time they discovered music. The first time they discovered fire. And we even had a made-up language where they did not speak English. They spoke cave talk. About 30, 40 word vocabulary. And we wrote it that way. And I was locked into when I took the job. I said, if film is picked up, gets a green light for production, I want to be locked in as director. And I was. So when we got the green light, I got to direct it. And we shot it in Mexico as a Mexican co-production because that was where the best locations were. And so we shot for 10 weeks in Mexico and came back, cut the film in the U.S., and came out in the spring of 81, I think. And it was great fun, and it's a very funny movie. And I urge all your viewers, go out and watch Caveman. It's really funny.
Yeah, it jumped on my to-watch list. I'm watching it this weekend. I'm very excited to check it out because it's got Ringo Starr, Dennis Quaid, and Shelley Long in it. I love.
It's a great cast: Ringo Starr, Shelley Long, Dennis Quaid, Jack Gilford, Avery Schreiber. Some wonderful Mexican actors, Shelley, Barbara Bach. That's the movie where Barbara Bach and Ringo Starr hooked up on my movie. I introduced them.
That's awesome.
Justin, did you have any questions?
I did have one. I'm curious. I imagine you're a very big reader. Is there any book or work of fiction that you'd love to see a screenplay of and be a part of that writing? Is there anything you see currently or reading currently?
Oh, more than one. But there was a film by Peter Matthiessen years ago called At Play in the Fields of the Lord, about a couple of mercenaries in South America, which is a wonderful tale. I've optioned a couple of books that I thought would make great movies. Never got anywhere with them, but that's one. I think there's trying to remember if there's any other literary works that I really think would make a great movie. There's almost too many to name, but
There'd be a lot. I was wondering if there's a copy of that.
yeah, there's the Peter Matthiessen. There's oh God, I would have to stop the interview, go into my computer, look for
Well, my very last question for you is, I didn't know there was a sequel to The Jerk. Were you involved with that?
Not at all. That was I forgot who was in that. Universal owned the property by that time, and they wanted. I think it goes Another Jerk. I think was the name of it.
Yeah, something like that.
So they made it. I forget who it wasn't Michael Richards. It was somebody else. But it was a oddball actor. Look it up on IMDb. I get money for it because it's I have as the originator, I get sequel and remake money and a credit based on. But I never saw it. I have no idea what it is.
Yeah, I didn't even know it was a thing until I was looking at your IMDb and it was on there. It says characters not written by.
Yeah.
Well,
If I was a Jeopardy category, it would be his hits begin with a J.
well,
Caveman was successful in its time, and it was great fun to do.
Carl, thank you so much for coming on talking to us. It was an honor and a blast hearing about Hollywood. And it's funny because, when we first got your name came across our desk, Jaws, of course, is what you think of. And then I started looking at your IMDb and I saw you were involved with Jerk and all this other stuff. And I was more concerned with talking about all the other stuff, like the improv.
Thank you.
That'd be more fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for coming on. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Where can everybody find you online?
I'm on Facebook. I have a personal page called Gottlieb, and then I have a page called The Quintessential Carl Gottlieb, which is more of a fan page. And I've got a website called, I think, jawslog.com, but that's kind of a static website. There's badly needs updating and just been sitting there for 10 years. Maybe I get a couple of redirects to Amazon to buy the book, but that's all.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I am not devoted to online activities. I realize it's necessary to have an online presence, and I answer my emails, and I get fan mail, and people can reach me by mail or by email or use contact LinkedIn. I'm available. I'm not ubiquitous, and God knows I'm not a 19-year-old TikTok dancer.
It's an option for you, Carl. You can totally do that.
That's the way you get 23 million viewers. That part of the internet is foreign to me. I don't know who those people are. I mean, most internet stars, I mean, even the big ones, people with 20 million followers, I have no idea who they are. I've never seen them. I mean, I'm not familiar with their work. I don't go to see their movies. I'm not a big action movie fan. I don't watch the tentpole movies. So a lot of those names, I go, I guess they're very popular.
I think you'd start a gaming channel. Carl Gaming. Be great.
All right, well, again, thank you so much for everybody listening or watching. From John, myself, and Justin, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.